welcome back. Thank you for having the courage to come back here after lunch. I'm aware this is digestion time, so I've made sure I don't put too much text on the slides. I don't want you to fall asleep. So I'm going to be doing more of a storytelling about how we used FreePBX to get phone call transcripts into our software, and also the journey we took to get to the best possible phone call transcripts. And I will also show you how we managed to harness the power of both a good user interface and artificial intelligence to get the most benefits out of those transcripts. And also I will talk about a real life example of how we applied it to a real customer. So my name is Thomas Michel. I'm the CTO of a company called Freds Software Limited, based in the United Kingdom. I'm French and this company is British, so what you're hearing right now is a mix of French-British accent. So if you're struggling to understand what I'm saying, just nod in approval. It doesn't get any better than this. But I will try my best to be intelligible. Basically, Freds Software Limited was created about 17 years ago, and it originally started as a shared mailbox, effectively. But Freds now is a B2B SaaS, and it's based around, it's running in the cloud, but it's also something that used to be, you could run locally, but now it's mostly in the cloud. And it's what we like to call a message hub that's sort of revolving around two simple principles. The first one being that there is value in sharing data. So I know that we live in a world where, currently we're actively trying to protect our private data and making sure that all our personal information doesn't fall in the wrong hands, which is fine. But we believe that in that process, we've sort of forgotten how to collaborate within a business environment. And some of the information that is worth sharing is sometimes locked into individual, whether it's mailboxes or storage. So we're trying to sort of fight that and allow people to collaborate in a clever way. Of course, there are safeguards. You don't want to share information with people who shouldn't be able to get access to it. But I'll come back to that in a minute. The other principle we have is that we think there is value in any form of digital message. So nowadays, a lot of companies, they don't work just with emails or phone calls. They also use different tools, whether it's WhatsApp, Skype, Teams, all those sorts of things. So how does Freds work? Well, basically, it's very simple. A company will subscribe to Freds, and they will get their own Freds instance, and then will be able to connect their mailboxes, their telephony system, and other sources. We have several APIs that can connect to different tools. And their messages will be available to view, search, and interact with within a single interface for that company. So let me just show you a screenshot. So this is from one of our branches called JPY, which is effectively a software reseller. And they are reselling a product called P5, which is backup software. So I've just showed you that screenshot just to illustrate what Freds is. In that example, I'm searching for messages that contain P5, which is the name of the product. And as you can see, there are, if you have good eyes, you can probably see there are emails, but there are also phone calls that you can search. This is quite useful for collaboration in all sorts of ways. You can use that for monitoring what's going on in the company, but also for instance, right now I'm giving this presentation, and I hope that my colleagues are working at the same time in the United Kingdom and talking to customers. And some of those conversations I will have to get involved with when I come back. So instead of relying on my colleagues forwarding me emails or giving me notes about what happened, I can just log into my Freds instance and I can see what happened when I was away. So originally, as I said before, we started with just emails. So that was about 17 years ago. And it wasn't that easy. As you can imagine, emails are not that simple. But we sort of got that sorted now, and we decided we would move to the second most common means of communication in the business, which is phone calls. But phone calls are even more challenging than emails for a simple reason. An email is just text, but a phone call is usually an audio file, and it's in its native state. You can't really search for phone calls or the information that they contain. And quite often, phone calls will be very long and have very little important information in them. So if you're having a 1 hour long conversation with a customer, it might be that there are only 5 minutes that are worth listening back to. And if you just have an audio file, then you find yourself struggling to scroll through the audio and find the relevant part. So naturally, we decided that we would apply speech recognition on this, or automated speech recognition, which is also called speech to text, but we like to call it ASR because it's just shorter. So if you haven't been living in a cave for the past 10 years, you probably know a lot of tools that do ASR in our daily lives. I have one in my pocket on my iPhone. It's called Siri. There's one from Amazon. I'm trying to get you engaged here. What's the name of the one from Amazon? Alexa, yeah. And the one from Google? Yeah, nobody knows what it's called, but they do have one. And those tools are really good for dictation and voice commands because that's what they were designed for. So they're usually designed for someone asking questions. I don't know if you had this commercial in the US, but I know in France when Siri came out on the iPhone, I remember there was a commercial with some guy pulling out his iPhone and saying, "Hey Siri, what time is it?" I was thinking, how lazy can you be? It's just on your screen. You can just say that. But since then, it has evolved a lot, and now we can do all sorts of things. But when we're talking about natural speech, which is what you do in a conversation on the phone, then those tools are pretty much useless. And there's another aspect of natural speech on the phone. It's the fact that we tend to talk over each other a lot. And actually, there is a reason for that. I've learned that in another conference I've done on speech recognition. Apparently, when you're speaking to someone face-to-face, you can see their face and their body language, so you have visual cues about when they're going to speak. Whereas when you're on the phone, you don't have those visual cues, and you tend to speak over each other a lot, and you probably don't realize how much you do that unless you actually listen back to a recording of a phone call. So we figured from the offset that we needed a way of separating speakers. And this is what is called diarization, which is a horrible word for me to pronounce, but here it is. Diarization is simply separation of speakers, so it's essentially saying, well, this chunk of speech is speaker A, this chunk of speech is speaker B, etc. And this can be done programmatically, in theory, but in practice it doesn't really work for a simple reason. If people have similar features in their voice, then software is not good enough to be able to separate the speakers. And it's not as good as the human brain can be. And I'll come back to that in a few minutes. There are a lot of comparisons between machines and human brain when it comes to speech recognition. And this is one of the things that the machines don't do very well, separating speakers. So what we decided we would do is we would need to get audio recordings where the speakers were physically separated into different channels, so we could split the calls and send the files separately to the ASR system so that they would be recognized as a single speaker, and then we could use the timestamps in the transcripts to sort of reconstruct the chronology of the call. And the other thing we realized we needed from the offset was high-quality audio recordings. And it may sound trivial, but actually a lot of PBX providers, when they say they provide you phone call recordings, they give you MP3 files because they take a lot less storage. But those files are usually highly compressed, and the audio is not that good. And obviously, the better the audio quality, the better you get the results from the ASR system. So those were sort of the two fundamental requirements when we started looking from scratch at how we could get phone call transcripts. So once we had defined that, we started looking at which tool we were going to use to capture the audio. And at first we thought we were clever. We looked at something from a company called Orex, which is a product that does basically VoIP traffic recording. So what it does is it just sits on the network, on the LAN, and it's just capturing SIP packets, and it's connecting them together and telling you, well, this is a phone call, this is the audio recording. So at first look, it seemed like it was a great idea because not only it was open source and simple to install, it was also completely independent from the PBX system that people were using. You could, in theory, use it on any PBX system. But we came across a little issue when we started going to potential trial customers. Basically, picture this. We would have to go to their office, and we would have to request access to their server room, and we would plug in a little box on their Ethernet switch, and we would tell them, well, don't worry about this little box, it's just capturing all of your IP traffic and sending it back to us. So as you can imagine, they didn't really like that. They thought it was a bit too intrusive. So we started looking at FreePBX, and actually we realized this is exactly what we needed. It's open source, so we can fiddle with it. We can do all the programming we need on the lower level. We get access to the audio recordings as they are recorded. We can use things like Mix Monitor to get the stereo recordings and have the channels separated. And also it's based in the cloud, so we can use it without having to install any physical hardware on the customer side. And as we were doing all this work, it turns out we were approached by a law firm called Winston Solicitors. So Winston Solicitors, they came to us and they said, well, they had a big problem. They were handling a lot of phone calls, and effectively what was going on is that they would have receptionists who would take in calls from potential clients who would describe their problem. And then the receptionist would take notes. And then they would transfer those notes to a junior lawyer who would then decide if they wanted to take on the case or if it was above their pay grade, and they have to escalate it to a senior lawyer, adding in more notes and more of their research work. And as you can imagine, when the information goes through so many filters, it's bound to be inaccurate, or there would be information missing, so they would have to call back the clients. They were wasting a lot of time and a lot of resources, and they were just simply handling too many calls. So what they wanted was something very simple. They just wanted their calls to be transcribed so that they could insert the transcripts directly into their case management system, and so that they could collaborate with the other lawyers and be able to see in their system the full transcript of a phone call. It turns out it was a bit of a nerdy law firm because they were already using FreePBX, and they had already tried to write their own integration with a company called Speechmatics, which is an ASR provider that we also use. So it was perfect for us because it was exactly what we were looking to implement, and they had already all the ground foundations of having FreePBX on site. So we decided that we would help them, and they would become a first pilot site for the telephony in France. And then we came across another problem. So in an email, when you look at the headers, you have the from field and the to field, and then CC, BCC. So you can easily know who sent the email and who received it. But in a phone call, you can have all sorts of things happening. You can have transfers, you can have people bridging calls, conferencing, you can have people parking calls, intercepting, you can have people leaving voicemail. I've discovered recently that you can also have a combination of keys you can type after leaving a voicemail, which continues the call even though you left a voicemail. So there's all sorts of complicated things you can do with phone calls. It's not as easy as emails. So we started looking at the CDR and trying to figure out what was happening in the calls. And after working on it for a long time, we realized that CDR was actually inaccurate sometimes when there were too many things happening. And this is when we took the advice of Asterisk themselves. That's somewhere in the documentation where they're saying, well, basically, you can go a level lower and look at what is called the CEL, which is the channel event logging, which is effectively telling you everything that happened at the channel level. And we estimated that the CEL contained about 5 times more information than the CDR. So it had all the granularity that we needed, but that also meant that it was also more difficult to interpret and to write the right programs for it. So we did what any good developer would do. We just went on Google search and we searched for CEL processor. And of course, we didn't find anything. Actually, we did find something on the FreePBX forums. We found one person saying it was impossible, and we found another person saying that they spent so much money on this that it actually tanked their business. So you know how dramatic people can be on forums sometimes. But that was just the motivation we needed to do it ourselves. So we spent a few months, and we actually wrote a CEL processor that was able to take all the CEL data and reconstruct the correct path of a phone call. And this was very important, especially for a law firm like Winston Solicitors, because as I said before, even though you want to share data, you don't want to share it with the wrong people. So they wanted to be able to accurately know who was involved in a phone call and who wasn't. So that was really important for us to get that right. Now, even though we had all these things in place now, we were still not really happy with the quality of the transcripts. In fact, a lot of ASR providers, they will tell you that they have 80%, 90%, some people say 100% accuracy. That's just a plain lie. There's no way they get that much quality on phone calls without any sort of training. But we couldn't really train the phone calls because we wanted this to be a product that could be distributed and could be used by several companies, and they don't necessarily know in advance who they're going to call. So we started looking at the human brain and how good the human brain is at understanding speech. And we sort of tried to dissect that. We didn't actually dissect the human brain, but that's just a figure of speech. And we figured there are 3 important things that make the human brain understand speech. The first one is audition. Obviously, if you want to understand what some people are saying, you have to hear them well. So that translates in the programming world by having good quality audio files, which we already had thanks to the asterisk recordings. There is also comprehension. So obviously, if 2 people are speaking a language that I don't understand, then even if I can hear them well, I don't know what they're saying. So that translates into using language models and LLMs as well that we could find, both provided by Speechmatics. But there was a third thing, and the third thing is called context. And to illustrate that, I have a little example that we like to use in the company. So there's the sentence, attacks on merchant ships. So imagine we're in the Navy, and I'm your Navy commander, and I'm shouting attacks on merchant ships. Well, obviously, if you're good soldiers, you're just getting on alert and getting ready to protect our ships that are being attacked. But now imagine we're not in the Navy anymore, and we're all accountants. Don't be sad. Well, it can be fun to be an accountant. You know, and, when I was in the plane to Miami, I watched this movie called The Accountant with Ben Affleck. It's basically like a typical revenge action movie where the guy is just a psycho killer trying to get revenge. But in the movie, he's also an accountant, and there is actually a very long scene of him doing accountancy work. It's just doing an audit and balancing checkbooks. Anyway, that was a bit weird. But imagine we're all accountants, and I'm saying attacks on merchant ships, then suddenly it has a different meaning because you have a different context. In the first example, we were in the Navy, and in the second example, I'm Ben Affleck. So then we started thinking, how can we apply context to our transcripts? And actually, there is something we already had from the beginning, if you remember what I said. Threads, or software, is able to also capture all the emails within the company. And so we could use that big corpus of emails for each company to extract specific keywords and the semantic field of the nature of their industry. For example, for Winston Solicitors, it was mostly the name of the law practices or some names of specific laws that they were referring to quite often and their general vocabulary. And once we applied that context from the emails to the transcripts, we started getting much better results. But just having that is not enough, because if you look at a full transcript of a phone call, sometimes it's just not that helpful. So we started looking at how we could make it helpful by having a good UI. So this is a screenshot of an example phone call that is in Threads. It's a very generic one, so I think it's just an electricity guy coming to install smart meters. Most classic thing you can get. And as you can see at the top, you have the audio player, so you can listen to the call. And we also opted for familiar chat bubbles that display the transcript, and you can see the different color for each speaker. And actually the part in green is the speech that is being spoken as you're playing in the audio player. So this is something that sounds very silly, but actually it's very helpful being able to see the text highlighting as you're listening to the audio, because then you become much more tolerant to errors. And instead of having a full text file that can, sometimes hurt your eyes, you can actually see where you are in the transcript and extract the information that you need. But there is also another feature that is hidden in this screenshot, and it's actually the most simple and the most useful feature that I can think of when it comes to displaying a transcript. It's the fact that you can actually click on those bubbles and the audio will jump exactly to that part. And it may sound silly, but actually when you have a 2-hour-long phone call, sometimes there's a lot of information at the beginning that is useless, and you want to listen back to that call because you want to remember what the customer said about the pricing they wanted or things like that. Well, you can just scroll through the transcript and click on the right bubble, and you can listen back to that. And it doesn't really matter if the transcript is not good enough, because you can actually listen to the audio, but at least it helps you find the information you need. And then, because we're like everyone else, we started looking at AI. I think someone from Sangoma this morning asked, are you actually using AI in your business? Well, this is a good example. So we started doing summarization, getting a summary out of the phone calls. And this is the summary of the call I just showed you earlier. And as you can see, you don't even need the transcript if you have that. It tells you exactly what the call was about. So requesting installation of smart meters and scheduling an appointment. And you can see at the bottom, the appointment is booked for Monday, November 27th. That's it. That took me 3 seconds to wrap up a 7-minute phone call. So as you can imagine, this was a tremendous achievement for a company like Winston Solicitors, the law firm. Instead of having to rely on a lot of notes, they could just look at the summaries, they could share the summaries, and they could tell, well, this client is having a problem with their divorce, they want an appointment on this date, they've sent this kind of document. They can just read the bullet points. So by May 2023, so a month after we've started implementing the system for Winston Solicitors, they had already handled more than 5,000 calls. They had 43 staff members using the system, and that was totaling about 300 hours of call time. And out of those 5,000 calls, they had about 3,000 transcribed. That's because they didn't want to transcribe the calls from their marketing team. So it was about 183 hours of call time. And then in September of the same year, we implemented the summarization for them. And they described it in their own word as a game changer. Since then, they've added more staff to the system. I think they're thinking also of adding their marketing team to the system, because it's something that they really rely on now. And in a sense, Winston Solicitors became our first happy customer. So in conclusion, we believe that FreePBX was exactly the foundation that we needed to be able to fulfill the requirements needed to get the best possible transcription for phone calls. We think applying the context is sort of our unique IP that has helped us make the best out of the transcripts, and also using AI, which everybody does now, as I've said before, is definitely the road to go. there are a lot of other examples of AI use that we're going to do in the future. I'll talk about that in the next slide. But essentially, Threads alongside FreePBX and Speechmatics has been an actual asset for a real-life company, and it's not just theory. They are using it as I'm speaking right now. But we also believe that it could be used in other industries. So we're thinking, call centers in the medical field. I know also my colleagues who do reselling software. They do a lot of technical support, and they use that a lot. Because sometimes they share the same customers, so it's convenient for them to be able to just look at the summary of a technical call and having all the information in there. And also the sales team might give quote to a customer, so when you're having a call with them from the technical end, you don't want to say the wrong thing, so you're able to see that in the summary. And as I said, in future ideas, we're thinking of adding chaptering, so everybody knows what chaptering is. You can have that, I think, on YouTube. So it's basically saying, well, this section of the audio is about introduction, how was your holidays, etc. This section is customer describing their problem. And usually the most interesting part is the last one, which is the outcome, where you're saying, well, the customer asked for a callback on this date, or things like that. We're also looking at extracting entities, so that could be addresses, names. I know we had people requesting that we could extract credit card numbers so they could hide them, so they could share the calls without having to share the confidential information. So all sorts of things we can do. We're also thinking you could use that for labeling, so you could say, well, anything that mentions AstriCon that could be extracted, and then you could put all those calls directly in a folder without having to manually sort them. And of course, a lot of other new AI technologies, sentiment analysis, which we've trialed, and it basically said that all of our calls were negative. So I think there's still work to do on that. And that's it. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about the conference, not about the Ben Affleck movie, I will take them. And if you're too shy to ask any questions, there's this link where I will put the slides. And there's also a recording of a webinar we did for AstriCon 2 weeks ago. Yep.
Is your product strictly only for FreePBX, or will it work with Asterix as well?
Yeah, it was with Asterix as well. So at the moment, we only implemented it for commercial use on this specific customer. I think they're using PBX Act, and we don't see any reason why you couldn't use it on different. So there is a little bit of code that is on the server where they're running FreePBX, and it's just collecting the information, and it has a sort of a queue system where it tells you this call has been processed or not, and it sends it back to our API in the VPC.
So do the audio files, are they
Yeah.
residing on the customer PBX, or are they sent to?
No, they're sent to us, and we offer the option to, so this law firm in particular, they wanted us to keep them for a specific number of days on storage, because in Europe we have the GDPR rules. But in theory, once the transcript has been done, there's no need to keep the audio files. You could just have the MP3 files from the system.
That was basically all included in that $120 a month, $3 per hour.
Yes. So the storage is, well, we're using Amazon as free. Honestly, it costs us more money to spend the time to delete the data than to store it, so we're not really looking at that at the moment. Any other questions? I'll put back the link. All right, well, thank you very much.